Neeraj,
Yeah,
everybody is here, Neeraj.
yeah,
Please
I'm just
start.
checking with Mohan sir. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear Neeraj. Yeah.
Great. Jain sir, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you very well.
Neeraj, if
Wonderful.
one person can hear you, everyone can hear you.
No, it's not like this. It's a technology.
No.
Uh, Professor Swamy, can you hear me? Hello. Haldia sir, can you hear me? See,
Professor Narayanaswamy, Neeraj is asking, do you hear him?
I said yes.
No.
Yes, I can hear him.
He said yes. He raised his hand.
Great. So that's wonderful. Haldia sir, can you hear me?
Absolutely, I can hear you.
Wonderful. So I'm going count to count. So thank you so much.
You haven't asked me. Go on.
Okay, so a very good evening. Nawshir sir, if you allow, we can start now. We have already 400 plus attendance, and I'm sure it's going to increase in another 10 minutes. So very good evening to one and all, and my special thanks to the panel chair, Mr. Nawshir Mirza. Nobody needs an introduction, but briefly, I would like to mention prominent board chair on eminent boards have wonderful experience both from the audit side as well as from the audit committee side. We have with us Mr. N Gupta, former executive director SEBI and now chief of a proxy advisory firm taking care of stakeholders and investors' interests largely. I am happy to introduce Professor R Narayanaswamy, who had been associated with a long stint at IIM Bangalore, had been associated with the board of NAFRA, the regulatory body on audit quality. I'm happy to welcome and introduce Dr. Ashok Haldia, who had been at the helm of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India as secretary and also managing director of a reputed firm, now quite active, a scholarly and a board advisor. I'm very happy to welcome CA and dear friend Mohan Lavi, again a board advisor and board member based in Bangalore. And finally, I'm happy to welcome again another dear friend, Mr. MP Vijay Kumar, on the board of Sify and also quite active in the space of audit and audit committees. Dear friends, the corporate governance is back to crossroads every time with newer issues and connotations which does not impact just one institution related to corporate governance, but has larger impacts on stakeholders, investors, regulators, and the entire ecosystem. We are back with a panel discussion on SA 600 discussions which are going on and the kind of impact it can levy on audit quality and eventually on the interest of stakeholders. I am very happy to welcome you all. We have now close to 500 participants, and I hand it over to the panel chair, Mr. Nawshir Mirza. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Neeraj. Good evening, friends. Thank you for being here. And in case I forget, I'd like to wish all of you a very happy Diwali. We are into the season. Friends, we have a somewhat controversial topic today to discuss, and I'm happy with that because unless there is controversy, these kind of discussions are very dry and boring. And so I'm happy we have a topic of that sort. And what I'd like to do is to very briefly take you back in history. I remember, and I've been now a chartered accountant for well over 50 years, I remember when the institute first attempted to develop accounting standards, and I'm talking of the early 1970s, there was enormous resistance from the chambers of commerce. It took many years of hard fighting with the three chambers then, ASSOCHAM, FICCI, and CII, to get them to accept that we do need standards like all the rest of the world has. Eventually, of course, as we all see, there was success and we have accounting standards. Coming to more recently, it took SEBI more than 20 years, or about 20 years, to get the public sector entities to accept that clause 49 and after that LODR has to be complied with. It took a very long time, a lot of effort before that succeeded. So resistance to change is a natural response or tendency. And I'm not at all surprised that this is a topic or this is a standard being proposed, which is becoming the subject matter of this particular controversy. What we are going to do in the panel is not to discuss a great deal of technical issues about how we will actually apply the standard, because it's a highly technical thing. I myself don't think I have the competence now to deal with technical issues on this, and I suspect several colleagues of mine on the panel don't either. So we'd rather have a substantial discussion on the principles, but that is not to say that we will ignore completely the technical aspects, and those of my colleagues in this panel who will contribute to that aspect will of course do so. So that's the second important point I wanted to make. The third is, we all know that the whole controversy is, and I don't like to beat about bushes, the whole controversy is that there is a concern amongst my fraternity, my colleagues, auditors, that it will deprive many of the smaller firms of work. And that's a genuine concern. I would not like to dismiss it and treat it as an insignificant concern. But what struck me is, when I looked at the responses from around the world, when the international standard was proposed in 2020, the ISA 600, and it was open for 3 years before it was brought into force, I did not see any nation, and this included a lot of developing countries, countries which we consider well behind us in stages of development, not raising this particular concern. They all had highly technical issues and valid issues, and I think several of them ultimately were addressed in the final ISA 600. But I did not see any country, South Africa, Malaysia, any of them, raise an issue that it will deprive the smaller member firms of work. So it's a striking fact that I have noticed, and I only looked because I was asked to chair this particular session. Otherwise, I have no reason to look at that. Right. Also, please remember, we currently have an SA 600 in our country, which was written in 2002. It was an amendment to an earlier SA 600, which was written about 5 or 10 years before that. But the 2002 SA 600 predates the requirement to prepare consolidated accounts. So when this particular SA was developed, standard of auditing, there was no requirement to have consolidated accounts. And we now have a requirement, or it's not that recent, it's been over 10 years now, we had a requirement to prepare group financial statements. So this particular statement that we are currently depending and using predates that requirement. And finally, I'd say to those who are participating here, the over 500 people already, that there is a very good discussion paper put out by NFRA. You are required and requested to respond to that paper. There is a provision there. You can get into that link. Please send your responses there, because if you vent your concerns here, they may or may not be addressed, because the panel is not members of the NFRA. We have no capability to influence the NFRA. If anybody in the NFRA is watching us today, maybe they'll make some notes. But the right thing you should do is to get onto that particular the NFRA website, read the discussion paper, and give your inputs to the NFRA there. This is not the venue for you to take time doing it, because you'll have wasted your effort with that. So with that brief introduction, I'd just like to start off. And what we're going to do is I'll sort of place a topic for discussion, and I will request my colleagues to then discuss it amongst themselves. And I may add into that. So I think I'll start with a very fundamental question. Why do we have auditing standards? Who are the stakeholders for whom auditing standards are written? JN, would you like, since in my screen you are right on top, that's the only reason I...
Thank you. I don't know whether this is a privilege or a punishment, but I will take it as a privilege. See, you have raised a very fundamental question, as you have said, that for whom the standards are being made. Now, I would say it is for all stakeholders. It is not that it is only for the shareholder or for the company management. It is even for the chartered accountants. Yes. The reason is it gives them a direction that what is expected from you, what you are doing. Otherwise, what will happen? Everybody will be a loose electron in this solar system and moving here and there without a direction. Having said that, the issue is very clear that if you have to put a hierarchy, then I would say in a hierarchy, the standards are made for the user, not for the supplier. In this particular case, in an auditing, the auditor is the supplier, the client is the company or the shareholders. So standards are for the benefit of the client or the shareholder. Therefore, the second point is that then who makes the standard? Now, everybody can't be making his own standard. So there has to be somebody. Now, can we say that the auditors are going to make their own standards? Again, it will not be possible for the simple reason. If I am the client, I will set what is the standard of the service. So I would say my opinion, and it is very simple, the stakeholders for standards are all who are participants, but the primacy is of the user, that is the shareholder or the management, or maybe regulators or statutory bodies who take further action based on that. So that is what I will say in opening remarks.
Thank you, Jayan. Now to my colleagues, do you agree, disagree, a different view on what Jayan has said? So all are then in agreement that our stakeholders are primarily...
Mr. Mirza.
Yes, go ahead. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think Mr. Gupta is right when he says that the auditing standards are required to aim at the users of the financial statements. But then I would say there are many stakeholders. Yes. And auditors and the auditing standards have to keep a balance in the interest of the different stakeholders when the auditing standards are prepared. Yeah. Now, the auditing standards are also meant for the auditors because it lends credibility to what the auditor does. It brings consistency. It gives a uniform framework. It brings the quality. It ensures the independence and integrity into whatever that the auditor does. So it's very, and also the process that they are required to follow. Ultimately, if they follow the right process, they would be able to deliver the right product to the users of the financial statement. Having said that, it's also important, as I said, there are conflicting interests. Those who prepare the financial statement, those who audit, and those who use. So the auditing standard have to balance, but while balancing that, they have to keep it uppermost in their mind the public interest that they are expected to serve. So that's, I would say, slight modification to what Mr. Gupta said. Thank you.
But Ashok, can I ask for a clarification? You said there is a conflict of interest between the preparer of financial statements, the auditor, and the user. What is the conflict? between these three?
If looking from the auditor's perspective, he would like to say that the auditing standards are not binding. They give them enough flexibility. I mean, see from their perspective. But the users of the financial statement would like that the auditing standards are transparent, straightjacketed, make the auditors perform what they are expected to do, and if they are not, then they are the auditing standards are able to hold them accountable. So that's what I'm saying. And the users of the financial statement would like that. So there would be some conflict. While as an auditor, I would like to look at the ground reality that prevails in the industry or at the entity. While the users of the financial institution say, "Oh, I'm not concerned. I want something which is fully transparent, which is fully fair. I'm not concerned what problem you have, whether you are paid with the fees or not, whether you have enough infrastructure or not. I want
Correct.
quality audit." So that's
Correct.
what I'm saying.
Correct. You're saying a very interesting thing, because accounting standards also same thing. The industry's opposition 50 years ago was, we want flexibility, and therefore a provision does exist. If you read the LODR, it says there is a provision for true and fair override, that if by applying the accounting standards, in fact the financial statements are not true and fair, you are permitted to violate the accounting standard by explaining why you have done so. It's called true and fair override. I've not seen it used in our country. I've seen it used elsewhere sometimes. But anyway, yes, somebody else wanted to say something, I think, before I made this interruption. So I think we've addressed that this is the issue, that the auditors are important. But I think JN made a very important point, that if there is a conflict, then which one will prevail? Will it be the preparer, the auditor, or the user? And I think he said it should be the user rather than the preparer or the auditor. And in this case, the preparer is not in the picture. So it should be.
I'm again, Mr. Mirza, I'm sorry. I'm again, I have to say something different. Yes. I'm saying you need to balance. And while balancing, you need to keep at the upper pedestal the interest of the public, because when you are aiming something, you have to take into account the ground reality as well. And accordingly, you have to balance the auditing standards or the accounting standards to meet those reality, while keeping the public interest that can be served in the best possible manner.
Yeah, you said on the upper pedestal should be the public interest. Yes. And indeed, you should not ignore the base of the pedestal, which is the auditors in this case. Yeah, JN, you want to...
Yeah, I'm again saying, I said the primacy is of the user.
Yes.
Everything else is after the user.
So that is more or less what Ashok is saying.
You cannot create a system which is not practical. You got to create a system which is practical. And auditing standards are required, as I said. Otherwise, each and every auditor will be free electron in the universe, and everybody will be going into his own direction. So we need a system, we need a channel where you got to move, but ultimately whom you are serving the user. You are not serving yourself.
Correct. Okay. Now let's move on from this.
Mr. Mirza, if I can add.
Yes, certainly. MP Vijay.
Yeah. Good evening to all. I just want to take a step back. The discussion is on the audit of the financial statements, and financial statements are prepared in accordance with the applicable accounting standards. So everything starts with accounting standards and then ends up with the audit standards getting applied. So if you look at accounting standards, there's a very explicit statement in the framework of the accounting standards that the primary users of financial statements are only the investors. So when the standard setting is done, whether it is globally or in India, the entire focus is only keeping in mind the investors. The creditors' interest and various other stakeholders, if they require any additional information, that is to be sought outside of the financial statements. Financial statements are not expected to give the information requirements which the other stakeholders have, because when the standards are set, they have very, very clear objective that we are focused only on the investors present and the future. And when you do an audit of such financial statements, which are prepared on the basis of standards meant for the investors, the audit also is meant for meeting the objective of giving an opinion, which is useful for such stakeholders. The development of standards, there are multiple stakeholders, obviously, who are involved. And what the audit standard seeks to achieve is to give a framework. I think Dr. Haldia mentioned it, a framework for how the work has to be performed. And equally important, it gives a framework of how the opinion needs to be expressed. So right from series 100 to 600 is all about how the work is to be done. 700 is all about how the work is to be, the opinion is to be expressed. So that's how the whole subject is constructed.
Excellent. I think you've given us a very good understanding of the overall structure of standards for auditing. And in fact, what you were mentioning was general purpose financial statements, which is what we prepare for the general investor.
Exactly.
Good.
And these
Now,
audit standards under discussion are meant only for general purpose financial statements. The entire audit
correct.
standards under discussion are only for general purpose.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
So now, moving on then, in that case, if the primary person interested or stakeholder is the investor, but that is not to disregard that there are other stakeholders who also need to be given regard to, what would be the best structure of bringing in, or does the current structure, the NFRA structure, give sufficient opportunity for an equally loud voice to these various stakeholders, of which, as has already been discussed, the primary one is the general investor. Narayan, would you like to deal with this, because you were on the NAFRA board till some time ago, and you will be more familiar?
Good evening.
Yes.
Thanks for inviting me to the panel. I would like to begin by saying that anything I say here represents my personal views, and they are not necessarily those of the NFRA or the MCA.
Yeah.
I would like to think that auditing standards exist primarily to help the users of financial statements. Users, of course, include all those for whom the statements are intended, and I think it includes lenders, that is, investors, creditors, and others. That's what FASB standards have also said. Coming to the question of how much these various stakeholders get involved. Now, if you look at the composition of NFRA, it's predominantly, there are 3 full-time members. There is scope for one more. There are 4 altogether, but right now there are 3, including chairperson. Then there are regulatory agencies represented there, SEBI, RBI, and so on. So then the CAG has a place there. Then there are 2 outside experts, of which I am one. You don't find any users there at all. I mean, I visualize myself as speaking for users in those meetings there. But you would need to have a user there, someone who is an equity or a bond analyst, a rating agency. For example, someone like let's say proxy advisory firm. So they don't exist there. I don't think this is just a kind of an incidental thing, because it has always been so. If you go back to the Accounting Standards Board of the ICAI, I was there for a few years there. Or if you look at any of the other SEBI boards and so on, typically you find they are all dominated by producers of information, or in the case of the ICAI, by those who certify the information.
Yes.
I think it's very easy to lose sight of the needs of users, because I have spoken to, I have taught a course on valuation for maybe 35 years of my life. I've got lots of analysts. They all think that the statements which are produced, the quality of the statements, the credibility of the statements, they have a very low rating of what comes out of companies. They say often we need to do a whole lot of adjustments to this, or we disregard them altogether. So I think it's a very important thing to involve the primary target of financial statements, which is users.
Yes.
So my position has always been that financial statements exist for users. So auditing standards must also address the needs of users. Now, I would like to go a step beyond this, and maybe I'll regret saying this later, but let me say it anyway. I think auditing standards do not exist to for the benefit of auditors. They exist to ensure that auditors do their job. For example, there is a protocol. My daughter is a doctor, so she knows lots of protocols in oncology. So there's a protocol for dealing with a patient. Now, the protocol is to ensure two things. One is primarily the needs of patients are addressed, for example, conflict of interest and best possible care and so on. Those are the kinds of tests which would apply. But also to ensure that doctors are protected so long as they do what is expected. So if in the event of litigation, if the auditors can demonstrate that they complied with the letter and spirit of auditing standards in a court, I think it would be much easier for them to defend themselves there. So in a sense, having clearly specified auditing standards help them too. But there is an issue here, which is auditors would often be tempted as the supplier of any goods or services typically would have this approach. Now, let me do the bare minimum. If possible, let me not even do the bare minimum and let me get away with what I have done. Now, there is a big risk of doing that. Therefore, the people who are going to be using the statements, their needs need to be brought in. They have to be part of decision making. Unfortunately, that has not been the situation at all. So I think it's important to involve them in any which way possible in establishing these standards. So my view has always been that auditing standards do not exist to promote the business interests of auditors. Auditing standards exist to protect the users of financial statements from misleading and fraudulent financial reporting. So auditors getting business, their growth, their livelihood, if that is defined as the objective of auditing standards, I don't know why we have them at all, because that is a different issue altogether. I mean, every one of us should take care of our own business interests. We don't, as a community, come together and say, we want to have a business interest protected by standards that we will present as being useful for investors. Now, if you say these are to protect my business interests, bold, italics, underline on the first page itself and say so, I have no problem with that. But then promoting these as meant for imparting credibility to the statements, improving trust in the numbers and so on, and then saying, no, these standards are important because SMP, small, mid-sized practices should be protected, concentration should not be there. I mean, you are bringing in other objectives, which are, I don't think, are the purpose of auditing standards. There exist other agencies, other instruments to achieve those objectives. So I thought from the beginning I was a little comfortable with this debate because the debate was not about how to make the financial statements and reporting quality better, but has always been about what is in it for me. If my life is going to be threatened, I don't want to do this. So I just wanted to add this to, in fact, Dr. Gupta actually implied this anyway, but I thought I'll make it more explicit.
Yes. Thank you very much, Narayan. Mohan, you have been silent and you are a practicing accountant.
Yes, sir.
Is your view?
Yeah, so I think largely I would tend to agree with what the others have also said. Just a little bit of a point which I thought I should make is that if you look at how these standards have actually been, as a part of the consultative process, I think most of the times we have actually involved only the regulators. The regulators we talk about, SEBI, RBI, only those regulators have been involved in the accounting standards and to some extent probably in the auditing standards also. So if this has to sort of expand to a larger participative process and get more people on board, I think that process has to be initiated. I think that I'll definitely agree with, considering the fact that yes, this is going to have a larger impact on the users of the financial systems, which, as we have discussed, could mean a lot of people actually. So it could actually mean a lot of people there. So whether this specific standards have to we have to do an outreach program with other people, not necessarily only the regulatory bodies, and that is something which definitely I think would need to be done.
Yeah, Mohan, take the very item we are discussing, SA 600. The NFRA has put out this as a discussion document. And as I mentioned earlier, that discussion document is open till the end of this month for comment. So they are attempting, but at the end of the day, the final decision on what will issue will be taken by the board of the NFRA.
Absolutely.
And that is what Narayan was saying. And he made it very clear, it's his opinion, that there needs to be representation in that particular final deciding body of the key stakeholders, and where almost we're all agreed that the principal stakeholder is the user of the general user of financial statement, not the specialized user. And I think that's a very important difference that was made, I think, by MP. And that needs to be expanded. Whether that would result in SA 600 becoming even more rigorous or less rigorous is another issue. But the fact is, we do need greater representation. And so if people from NFRA are listening in, there is one message, at least this panel seems to be agreed upon. Ashok, you agree with that?
And also one more point, Mr. Mirza, I think I'll add to this to say that I'll fall back on what you said earlier also. I think it's very important that everybody has to respond to that document of the NFRA. I think that is that's an absolute, because we could get in suggestions from people who are not necessarily, the regulators. We could get a third perspective from anybody else also, which could probably be useful.
Right? Yes. No, yes. I would, Mr. Mirza, I would agree to what Mr. Narayanaswamy said, and I would add to that. The process of auditing and accounting standard formulation in India and globally is something which has undergone reforms. I believe, and I was part of that reform process 15 years ago globally, and that needs to be further reformed. The process is that at the time of formulation of standards, the users of the financial statements and the different stakeholders are consulted. When it is finally approved, then possibly it is the profession which have an overwhelming influence in approving those those standards. But of late, with those reforms, the independent regulators have come to play their role. And we have presumed that the regulators, sector regulators, would not only represent themselves, but also represent the interests of the other stakeholders. So for example, the Reserve Bank of India would be expected to not only their own interest, but also of the lenders, and also whose money the banks, borrow or they take on deposits. So that premise goes in India. But I certainly agree that at the cutting edge, the users of the financial statements in one or other manner should be involved. But I would also say it's not the question of the formulation alone. It's the question of mindset. Because if you are an auditor or you are an accounting profession, if you have public interest at the top of your mind, then I have no problem even if you set up or you approve. Even if a regulator doesn't have in his mind at the top of his mind the public interest, then possibly the process of standard setting approval would be flawed. So the mindset is very important, and that mindset has to be brought into whosoever formulates the accounting standards and whosoever approves that accounting standards. Now that I would say, but then look at the globally, this independent regulators coming into play, the role of the role of self-regulatory body has minimized to a great extent. Indeed. But in the model of India is something different and unique globally. There is no other country where the model of India for framing of accounting or auditing standard is prevalent elsewhere.
You're right. Ashok, sorry, someone wants to say something?
No, please go ahead, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Even when our current IND AS was brought in, which is substantially IFRS, it took many years before there was an acceptance, because there was the argument made India is different. But eventually, what happened is, if we are to be part of the global economy, if we are part of the global family, we cannot always say we are different, so we will behave differently from all the other 6 billion people on earth. And this 1.5 billion will have its own behaviors, and we will not be like the other 6. And so on IFRS, finally, the institute or whoever conceded, and we now have Ind AS, which is, I mean, the IFRS with a few localized changes, but substantially that. The same is true of also most of our auditing standards. Let us not pretend that these are all inventions that came out of India. There were earlier auditing standards which were actually developed, as you rightly say. But the current auditing standards are substantially taken from international, and there's absolutely nothing wrong about it. Every country is doing it, because these are not being developed by any one country. They are being developed by a consortium of those countries. They have representatives. Our own institute has representatives on those various international bodies. So they are as much our standards as they are the standards of Americans or Europeans or Japanese. Having said that, now let's come to the real issue here in front of us. And how do we break this tie? And Ashok, I think you made this reference of on top of the pedestal and at the lower part of the pedestal. To break the tie, let us say, will the current recommended ISA 600, which is the international one, enhance the credibility of audited financial statements, or it will not really enhance the credibility?
You are asking me?
I can ask anybody, but since we are talking, you.
Yeah. You know, I would first going back to the earlier point, yes. I would say that as we are largely following the international standards, both in accounting and auditing, now what I would believe is that we should have a greater influence in the standard setting process internationally.
Sure.
Unless we have that, then we would keep on cribbing, and we would keep on fighting as we are now doing. Yeah. So the point we have to think in terms of, as a regulator, as an accounting standard setters, how we can increase their influence so that our interest, because when the international standards are set up, interest of India is as important as when we standard are set up, users' interests are important. So that's very important, that how do we increase that influence. The second part is that in terms of the ISA, I am of the firm belief that the SA 600 existing, and incidentally, which the NAFRA has now issued a clarification, is in no way different than the ISA 600 in spirit. There are two things which can be argued and discussed, but I would say that's the way the SA 600 has been drafted. But implicitly, the SA 600 which exists today means what the ISA 600 suggests today, both in terms of whose responsibility it is and whether or not the working paper can be shared. So I don't find any problem with the ISA 600. ISA 600 in terms of 60-70 pages elaborates what should be the process, how the cooperation and the collaboration between the principal auditor and the component auditor should take place, how the information should be exchanged, how the documentation should take place. So I would believe that the ISA 600 would enhance that, because let me tell you out of my own experience, and I think all of you are far more experienced in the industry, that whatever what we call unfair, I'm not using the word fraudulent or other things that take place or that has taken place in the past, that has been through the group entities. Now, if you are not able to check that, the exit point from one entity to the entry point of the another entity and so, multi-layer and multiple group entities, you will not be able to ensure the transparency and the fairness in the state of affairs or at the group level. And unless somebody owns that responsibility, as a group auditor, I believe there would always be gaps available. So while, you can always say conveniently that I have relied upon, And that is being done under the SA 600 now, which to me is not the right thing, and which SA 600 doesn't require one to simply rely on what the component auditor says. He has to apply his mind. And when you apply your mind, you ask for what he has done, what are his papers, because the doubts arises. So I would believe in spirit both are same. So I would say ISA 600 to that extent would certainly increase the credibility of the group financial statements.
Any views on what Ashok has just said, colleagues?
So can I just add on to this, and I'll also request Kevin to comment on what I'm saying also, right?
Yes.
So basically, I think, sir, there are two things which we need to understand, and I think this is something which has also been mentioned. The existing SA 600, sir, the unrevised version,
Yes.
it does give the principal auditor a little bit of power, shall I say, to actually look at what the common auditor is doing. There's a very small paragraph there which says that in case he feels it is required, he can always fall back and ask for more information on those things, right? What ISA 600 has done, or the revised SA 600 issued by NFRA has done, is to actually sort of give him more powers on that. And I think here, Dr. Mirza, I think we should look at basically where NFRA is coming from. NFRA is coming from what they have seen. What they have seen in whatever inspections they have done. I think they're coming only from that point of view.
Yes.
Whereas the auditing standards have, the SA 600 has been established or ruled as a general auditing standard, not considering this particular background of this history which NFRA. So I think we're looking at two different situations here, wherein NFRA has got this database of what they have actually seen in the inspection reports, and thereby saying that you just can't say that I relied upon the work of the component auditor. So I think to that extent, that has actually sort of enhanced. This revised standard has given more power for him to actually look at it. And in case there are any red flags which have not been pointed out, I think he will now have to be a little bit more careful to sort of point out and probably ask a few further questions from the competent auditors.
Yes.
Having said that, I should also say that the October 3rd circular of the NFRA sort of adds more power to the existing SA 600. So even if we do not discuss the revised SA 600, October 3rd circular actually clarified a lot of those things. So it is as good as the old SA 600 plus the October 3rd circular make the revised SA 600 for all practical purposes.
Jane, you want to add?
Following on, I would say that when we say that it gives more power to the auditor, I would say, rephrase it, I don't need power with the auditor. I need more responsibility and accountability to the auditor. That is one. The second thing is they said that you said registers to change. And Mr. Haldia's point that India should get more say in this. So I always say either become a follower or become a leader. Be proactive and do something. The issue here is something is being done and we have a reluctance to do that. Third thing that to say that is present SA 600 sufficient? My opinion, not sufficient. For the simple reason I am raising a question that ILFS happened, DHFL happened when ISA 600, SA 600 was there. The question is, will ISA 600 type of accounting standard, auditing standard, will reduce the chances of ILFS happening or DHFL happening? My opinion is yes, for the simple reason, and I give a very simple example, that a principal auditor which is auditing the entire group conglomerate has a responsibility like ISRO had for sending Chandrayaan. Now, ISRO could not have said that I have got a component from this company X, I am not responsible for the quality. ISRO has to be responsible and testing each and every component of Chandrayaan before fitting into Chandrayaan. So a principal auditor has to say that I have checked, I am conferring with auditor A for the company A, auditor B for the company A, and put together I have created a statement. The today's situation is this, just one line, oh, we have obtained sufficient evidence that it is that person has done responsibility, blah, that's all, that's matter. And I would say this has to change. And lastly, I would want to make a point. The reluctance to change is very dangerous. And you ask Bombay Stock Exchange BSE, that what happened when the brokers were reluctant to go to the electronic trading, it gave birth to NSE.
Okay. Anyone else want to say something? See, Ashok, there is a substantial change between the two. The new standard even says the auditor, now the group auditor can no longer say that there were other auditors involved. He has to, in his opinion, not even obliquely disclaim any responsibility. He signs off, these are true and fair, etc., etc. No reference to any other auditor. And we must remember, branch auditors are not appointed by the shareholders. They are appointed by the audit committee. Essentially, the board of directors will endorse what the audit committee is recommending. If the audit committee is gracious, they will ask the group auditor, would you think this branch auditor is good or not? But if the audit committee or the management is so inclined that there is a component in which they want to do something that is wrong, they will appoint a convenient branch or component auditor without reference to the group auditor. And if the group auditor has to take entire responsibility, and now I'm coming to the concern that I think exists, take the entire responsibility, he has to look at the actual work done, which means look at the work papers. Now, I will tell you from my own experience of many, many years, that there are many firms that even today are not maintaining good work papers that justify what they are doing. I'm not making a generalized statement that every firm is like that. Indeed, there are firms which are doing a great job, but there are also many firms that don't maintain work papers. So if the principal auditor is to take responsibility, he does need to look at the work papers, because if he's, as the current standard says, he can visit the component auditor. What will he do at the visit? Have a cup of tea, ask him, sab theek se audit kiya na? That will say, haan, theek se audit kiya. And he'll go back to his office. And he will take full responsibility for what that guy has done through this particular form. He's entitled to look at the record.
No, Mr. Mirza,
Yes.
I'll only add one thing. The
Sure.
existing SA 600, why it says that the audit report has to say that he has relied on the component auditor. But if you look at the role and responsibility of the group auditor in the SA 600, you will find that he is expected to do, and to me, he is expected to do whatever that ISA 600 would require the group auditor to do. So he cannot simply take a plea as possibly taking presently, that he simply relied upon the audit report of a component auditor, because the group audit is not aggregation of audit reports.
No.
That SA 600 very clearly says. Anyway, I'm sorry, we went into technical discussions.
No, little, I think we need to, because see, what really is at the heart of the controversy? Why is there a fear that the smaller firms will lose their group audit component audit opportunities, and everything will be grabbed by the big guys? And that fear is very well founded. One reason I'll say it is well founded according to me, and I would like you to disagree, is this: if there is a separate component auditor and his work papers are to be reviewed, there is an additional amount of work to be done. Additional work means more cost to the client. Today, in most cases, component auditors are appointed because they do a good job, but they do it more cheaply than the guy who sits on the top with a big fancy name. That's why they're appointed. But now clients will say, look, I will save there, but then I have the extra cost of this big fancy guy coming down and reviewing your work papers. So when I add the two, I've lost the financial advantage of having a smaller firm do a component audit. I might as well give the whole lot. So it's a valid and genuine concern. But I think there is another aspect also, that many auditing standards, especially the one on documentation, are not being adequately complied, and there is a fear that any such exercise will show up that the component auditor is not complying with the documentation standards. I'm not even speaking of other standards. I'm assuming they're complying, And documentation is a technical issue. How much you document, do you, don't you? But it's a standard. And that is where I think there is a fear amongst the smaller firms that these big guys will come with their international packages and so on, where they document every single decision, every single reason, every single activity, and they will apply that particular yardstick to a smaller firm's work, which is done very, very well. The audit is very thorough, no doubt of it. I know of an auditor whose only work papers were the annual signed financial statements. He had nothing else in his file. I have myself seen this. So those kind of auditors are now concerned that how will they, meet that standard, number one. How will they deliver at the price at which they are doing audits? Because if they have to do all of this, their audits will also get costlier. Then the client will say, "Fayda kya hai? I'm not able to save any money giving you the work." So this is genuinely a fear. Yes, Narayan.
See, I think this is difficult for me to understand, because with the revised SA 600 or without revised SA 600, the responsibilities of the component auditors remain the same. There is no additional responsibility on component auditors as a result of the proposed changes. So what appears to me, and I have some anecdotal example, at least one I want to mention here. What appears to me is that smaller firms probably are not doing adequate documentation. They don't probably have appropriate procedures. Their concern is really not about not doing the work. The concern seems to be more about being detected. That is, I have been getting away with this all these years. Nobody has ever told me anything. And I have also certified that I am complying with the auditing standards. But now, if I say that someone from the audit community itself is going to come and ask me, what did you do? How did you select the sample? What documentation have you got? Now you say have a representation letter. What additional evidence do you have to show? So these kinds of questions, now someone from my own audit community is going to ask, the regulator obviously will ask, the regulator is asking. So my worry is not that they are thinking about being questioned if they have been doing what is expected of the auditing standards, because none of the remaining auditing standards is going to change as a result of this. This only makes the principal or the group auditor responsible, gives the group auditor the responsibility of ensuring that the financial reporting of the group as a whole makes sense, as well as the component auditors have done their work. So why should component auditors be scared? I'll just give one example why they should be scared. I have an anecdotal example. Now, someone known to me there was some dispute between the auditor and the association. It's not a company; it's a small, kind of a gated community association. And there was a fight within the group association, and then they started making allegations against each other. And then the auditor was accused of having been with one of the groups, the managing group, currently executive group. Okay, so the auditor was caught, and the auditor spoke with me. So I asked her, now I want to understand before telling you anything, what are your terms of engagement? Have you got a letter of engagement? What is the letter? What does it say? She asked me, what is a letter of engagement? This is just about 4 years back. Okay, so this is a very small one-person firm. So she thought this was easy money coming, and the fee was so small. I mean, maybe it's just less than 1,000 rupees even, because she said, finally, she told me, I'm doing it for free, virtually for my friend. I said, if you are doing something for free, you can't say you will do anything. For example, if I'm doing, let's say, cardiac surgery free for my friend, I can't say I will use some rusted scalpel. Okay, I will still have to meet those responsibilities. Since I used a medical example, let me go one step further. I think the group as auditor now, in medical legal language, the group auditor is now has to meet the captain of the ship doctrine, which means a surgeon at the operating table is responsible for what goes wrong. You cannot blame the physician, you cannot blame the anesthetist, you cannot blame anyone, the nursing staff. The surgeon who performs the surgery or heads the team of surgeons is responsible. I think that is what is going to happen with ISA 600, the revised SA 600. I don't think if you have all been doing our bit properly, we need to worry at all. So the fact that there's so much noise actually tells me that something is not being done, which should always have been done. It will get detected now, and therefore I am worried. So I think this is something which is a more fundamental issue of the extent of compliance which is happening right now. Perhaps auditing standards exist on paper and they are not being complied with for whatever reason. I'm not making the sweeping statement saying, just to simplify, I'm saying. So maybe those who are not complying with them but have been certifying that this have been complied with are a bit worried. As far as the concern about a bigger audit firm taking away the smaller jobs and so on, I don't think anything right now prevents them from doing that. Take, for example, a very large company, let's say number one listed company in India. Now, they have a number of subsidiaries, maybe 100 associates, joint ventures, and so on. If only the principal auditor, let us say the auditor of the group entity, tells the group, a board, I am uncomfortable with a whole lot of other people who are doing, give all the work to me, I think the group will have no option but to give it to them. So if they wanted, they would have done it already. It is not as if they will do it now. They could always have done it. The worry now is that, okay, now they have not done it so far because maybe they didn't want to do it, but now this prods them to do it. I don't think that is very true. And moreover, for a big firm, let's say, one of the big four accounting firms, it would be uneconomical to take up a bank branch audit. I don't think they will touch this even. I mean, just imagine the example I always give, a branch in Madurai or Meerut. Why would Deloitte take that audit? I mean, it's something which would be uneconomical. Their billing rate would be per day rate, would not even be that fee they will get. And they will have to work for 1 week or so. So the fear that they will take away all the work and gobble up and so on, I think that is unfounded. But the fear that I will be detected, they will review my work and could come up with something, that fear is well founded. I think that fear has to be addressed by doing one's work. So there's an app called hard work. That app has to be followed. That's all.
Narayan, actually, I'll just give a slightly different analogy from what JN and you give. When you sit in an aeroplane, the airframe and the engine are two major components of the airframe, each of which has within it thousands of parts sourced from thousands of different vendors. And take the 737 MAX 2 crashes. I don't know, 300-400 people died in those crashes. It was a software defect. Everyone went and caught Boeing. They didn't find out who is the software. So Boeing took responsibility. And as you both said, that's because if you are putting your name on a product, you are responsible then for the whole product. So if Deloitte or EY or whoever puts their name on an audit opinion of a group financial statement, they have to be responsible for all of it. And if you make them responsible for all of it, they should then have the means of being comfortable that they can take that responsibility. We cannot compel them to take a responsibility without them, by denying them the means of that comfort. JN?
Yeah. Okay. So first to tell you your example.
Very briefly, JN, because we have one major aspect still.
Okay. So
and if
you're
just re-endorsing what's been said, then I think we need to move on. That's my request.
So I would
Unless
say
you have a new point.
Mr. Narayanaswamy has hit the nail on the head. It is a myth that quality is not there. That quality depends upon the individual. As he said,
Absolutely.
Now the issue that we have is this, that you have seen quality cannot be associated with the size. If you see all the big failures that have happened in India have been associated with the big names. So it is not that the big names are Pinnacle of good auditing standards.
No, never.
An issue is the smaller auditors. If they are not being trusted, it is not because they probably lack in the quality. Probably they lack in the effort. And secondly, they are many times planned with the client. You have to break the nexus that I go and dance to the tune of the client. As long as you keep on doing that, you will remain in the shadow. If you want to get out of the shadow, you got to be doing the quality work.
Yeah, Jayan, I mean, that is all, that's a good, noble sentiment. We have to look at what is the reality, as Ashok said. Yeah, Ashok.
Yeah. I think what Mr. Narayanaswamy and Mr. Gupta said, endorsing that the size is not necessarily the right indication for the quality.
Correct.
And there has been tendency that the companies would appoint the same auditor for the component as well. In India, that tendency is there, and globally that tendency. The point of difference and I think the change in the approach that I'm suggesting, since the group transactions are the major source of whatever the frauds that are taking place, or which have more propensity for the fraud or diversion of funds or through the related party transaction. My suggestion would be that the group auditor and the component auditor should be different. They should never be the same. Now, the companies would like that the both are the same for the cost, or they would give blah, blah, blah reasons. But I believe the audit is an important function, is a public interest function. The companies cannot be allowed to say that the audit fees is more and we are incurring more on the audit, and why we should incur more on the audit. That tendency has to go out of the corporate minds in India. Unless that goes, the quality of audit would not improve. Now, coming back to that, possibly we have made the debate as small versus big.
No, it's not.
Possibly the debate should be the small and big and small. Once that debate focus on that, then we would see that how the small can be strengthened in order to be a good auditor, or in order to do the quality audit, in order to be a good component auditor. And what we can do is, this ISA 600 is a very comprehensive document. It is difficult to be read and difficult to be understood. There has to be implementation guidance. There will be a number of implementation issues, how to establish coordination, and how principal auditor ensure that the component auditor listen to them, and if it doesn't listen, what he needs to do. There are many issues that are going to crop up. So there need to be implementation guidance, and there has to be training and guidance for the component auditors.
Correct.
Now, and if you separate the component auditor from the component audit, from principal auditor from a component auditor, I believe you would be developing a large number of small firms into high quality or a greater quality firms, because there would be interaction between principal auditor and the component auditor. That interaction, the sharing of experience, the notes with each other, the documents with each other, would strengthen both the principal auditor as well as the component auditor. So I would believe, and the audit committee should ensure, it should be guidance to the audit committee, guide to the audit committee, that they should never appoint the principal auditor as a component auditor. That would be my radical thought, but I firmly believe that if the group transaction have to be transparent, then the principal auditor and group auditor would be different. Now, if that happens, the group auditor can question the principal auditor. He can ask for the working paper of the principal auditor, that if the money has flowed from the parent company to the subsidiary, on what basis the parent company has allowed that? Did they do the due diligence? Did the auditor look into this? So that he can ask reverse information from the principal auditor. So to me, the component auditor need not afraid about this ISA 600. It will only strengthen them.
Yeah, Ashok, you said an interesting thing. Yeah, just a sec.
Yeah.
The joint audit concept is actually addressing the concern you have mentioned, that by having joint auditors, instead of a separate group and component, have joint auditors. That is one of the things, and that's a SA 299 issue, which is separate, which I'm sure they're addressing. But yes, if MPV.
Yeah, I'll just confine myself to the two specific questions you have mentioned. The previous one, I tried to come in, but I couldn't, was as to whether no problem. It's a large panel, I can understand. So the previous question was whether the investors are engaged. I think in India, it's not yet there. But today, I think credit to IICA, and I don't know whose thought it is, or yours. We have Mr. N Gupta representing the proxy advisory firm. I think that's a good beginning. I only hope going forward, investor communities like the proxy advisory firms, the mutual fund associations, the rating agencies, all of them get to participate more. So let's look at it constructively. The second question which you framed was, will ISA 600 enhance credibility of the financial statements? I'm just borrowing your words. So I think, as you yourself mentioned in that question, we are not question of are we bringing credibility, it's a question of enhancing credibility.
Yes.
So I think what we need to give credit to the entire evolution of the industry and the profession is the fact that there have been credible financial statements. In fact, if it was not so, I don't think India would have seen this level of FII participation, private equity participation, even during COVID period when people could not come and do a physical due diligence. People could do the diligence and they have invested. And I don't come across too many instances where people have adjusted the financial statements to arrive at saying that income is recognized wrongly and hence I will stay away from this. There are not too many instances. And the instances where we had failures are all management failures, value system failures and things like that. I think those are a collusion. Those are categories of collusion. I think we need to address that separately.
Yes.
Will ISA 600 solve the whole problem and make it good? I don't think we should have that kind of an expectation. Now, as Ms. Narayanaswamy mentioned, I think there's one very valid point which he had mentioned, that the component auditor's life before and after remains the same. It's just that in the current SA 600, component auditors probably did not feel so sensitized enough. So probably now they get more sensitized, but otherwise the responsibilities remain. And as regulators, we always had the right to punish them. In fact, if we had punished a few component auditors, probably the quality would have also scaled up across, while we hold the principal auditor responsible. And component auditors are supposed to be of equal professional competency, when they accept an engagement. So I think some actions on the component auditors will also help enhance the overall quality. And what we also need to recognize is that in this entire whole audit aspect, there is the audit committee, there's a board who actually recommend the appointment of auditors to the shareholders for the entire entities within the group. So when they appoint, what kind of responsibilities are they taking in terms of identifying the right auditors, both in terms of capacity and in terms of competence and experience? I think that we cannot say that they will wash away the responsibility and say that, okay, some auditors are appointed. I think that responsibility is, I think it is a journey. As you mentioned, we are now talking about enhancing the credibility, and excellence is a journey. And I think all of us are walking the journey, and I'm pretty sanguine that with all the kind of awareness which is now happening, we will all take the right steps for increasing accountability. In fact, everybody's common message has been that auditors should take accountability or responsibility. I'm sure that will certainly happen. I don't think we should be skeptical or pessimistic about it. And I don't think auditors have wished away, because there are certain limitations the way the audit standards work also. We also need to look at that. If you ask me my hands-on experience, the biggest weakness in the Indian financial reporting system is the effectiveness of the internal audit, because a statutory audit does have some limitations. So unless we couple it, and I think Caro and other things have tried to do a little bit of bridging that particular gap to improve the quality. And I think we are all going right in that journey. While we are all trying to improve, it's important that we don't have a messaging to the public at large that everything is bad and the whole set of things are unreliable. I think that will be doing a great disservice to all the people who have done a huge service to the growth of the economy over a period of time. I think we need to be conscious of it. I'm not, I'm just responding specific questions. And while I'm on the panel, I'm hearing the other members also, doesn't mean that I accepted those views. So I don't want this to get into a debate, but I think it's important I share my view while I respect the views of others, because each one comes with a different experience, and I respect the views of others as well.
Actually, MPV, I don't think anyone in the panel has had any significant difference of view. But there's one final question. The ISA 600, which, the SA draft 600, which NFRA has circulated, is exactly the ISA 600, the international version. And that is only because they are saying we are hoping to receive sufficient information back by which then we will be modified. So I understand the NFRA's view. But there is one significant difference which the NFRA itself is putting up, and is put up right on the top of the discussion document. A new SA 600, if it's implemented, will exempt all government-owned entities, PSUs, government banks, and government and insurance companies. Does this panel believe this exemption is justified? Yes, JN.
I always believe that one has to lead by example. And if the government regulated body is bringing a legislation and say, okay, the discipline doesn't apply to me, you got to do this, you got to pray to the God 5 times in a day, but I can keep on committing murders, I don't want this. So
Correct.
First, you got, unless until there is a reason. Say, presently, for the defense company, it is exempted that they do not take approval for related party transaction. One can understand that you have defense contracts which need not go into public domain. But when it comes to accounting and consolidation, I don't think where is the secrecy, where is the need for exemption. If I can do 2 plus 2, you ought to do 2 plus 2 together. It can't be that I should not do 2 plus 2, you should do 2 plus 2. Very simple.
So does anyone believe, but Jayan, I must take objection to the example you gave of praying 5 times a day and continuing to do murder. We should stay away from such examples because we all know what you have referred to, and it's wrong. Any different views, not on this example, but on this government being exempt? Yes, Narayan.
See, I think, in fact, I also have some mixed feelings about the exemption. My personal experience, having been on a bank board, tells me that a lot of the problems happen as a result of failings by branch auditors. Now, why I think we need to have a standard like the revised SA600 is because if you ask the branch auditors, they will blame the statutory auditors. You ask the statutory auditors, the bank on which I was, there are 6 of them. Each will point to the other, and finally, nobody is held responsible. And they will also say it's the branch auditor's job. Then there is another animal called a concurrent auditor. That person will blame for many things. So it goes like this. So this reminds me of this famous Agatha Christie book, Murder on the Orient Express. There is a murder, but nobody is responsible. Yeah. So I have personally found it very frustrating. In fact, one instance of a huge money laundering fraud which I saw, we couldn't fix responsibility on anybody. So I definitely think that it is important to make someone accountable. So branch auditors, I think it is better not to let them off the hook. I think they should be also made responsible in some way. At the same time, I would like to mention here that now that is the general impression. I also read in papers and so on that NAFRA has decided to exempt PSUs and PSBs. That is not quite right. Actually, it's part of the questions that NAFRA has asked the consultation paper. So one of the questions that is asked is, should this be done or not? So the respondents to this could also say what they feel about it, because having 2 sets of standards, one for public sector enterprises and banks, and another for other entities and so on, is that doable? Is that a good thing? Because finally, when the statements are signed, the auditor has to follow the same standards regardless of, and we are talking of only PIEs, public interest entities, a large listed public sector company, right? For example, let's say SBI versus HDFC Bank, the standards have to be identical because these 2 banks are of similar size, operations are similar. I mean, the significance of these institutions are again similar, and therefore I would say the same standards would make it more comfortable. So I would encourage people to respond to that question, saying, so why should this be done? We are not comfortable with this at all, or we think it is okay for this. So I think it's kind of not concluded, because I read in commentaries that this NAFRA has exempted this, NAFRA has not
No,
examined anybody as of now. It is actually on the table very much. So I think it's a discussion
correct,
question. So people
correct,
have to respond
correct,
to that question. I leave
correct.
it there.
I half suspect that the regulator would love to have everybody compliant. I mean, and the example of SEBI and the PSUs who just never complied, and JN was there at that time in SEBI. I mean, they flouted women director, this, that, they did what? Independent director. For years, they never had independent directors, forget women. So correct. Now, Mohan, you've been very silent. Is there anything you want to add before we open the discussion to the audience?
Yeah, because I was silent because others were speaking. So that's okay.
Yes, I know.
Okay, so I just thought there was one thing which I wanted to add on that, the previous point about the small audit firms and the medium audit firms. I'm coming from a practical situation wherein we are the competent auditors for many companies wherein the principal auditor are, the large firms. And I can tell you, Dr. Mirza, nothing has happened at least in the last 4 or 5 months to actually change what the situation in terms of allocation of audits or whatever it is. I think nothing has changed. We've been having discussions with them, of course. They also are looking at this standard, with the same set of eyes as we are looking at it. In fact, I'll put it in a lighter way. And I think the competent auditors today can use this to their advantage. Yes. What is going to happen is that work is going to increase. I think the remuneration should also increase, because documentation is going to increase. So I think if quality is maintained, I think it will work to their advantage. So I don't see that factor of, the threat of their work going away. I'll completely buy MPV's point, the fact that if the audit committee is tasked with this responsibility and they feel the auditors are competent, I see no reason why that should shake the, the wheel right now. I don't see any reason why that should be done. As far as the last question on, yes, sir.
No, go ahead.
On the PSUs, I completely agree that there should be no exemption. Just considering the sheer size of the assets they've got, there's no reason why there should be any exemption at all. So, there are sectors and the assets, I think there should be no exemption at all.
Mohan, there's something. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, MPV, yes, say.
Yeah. So specifically on this question, I am also of the view that no exemption is to be considered. But I think the only one challenge which the Reserve Bank might have to work with a few public sector banks, because the way the accounting is maintained in public sector bank versus a private sector bank, centralized versus decentralized, and all of that stuff. I think that's the one bit of challenge. But we have not made such kind of exemption anywhere. If we give a reasonable amount of time for this standard to get applicable, let's say April 26 or April 27, whatever time, I think by the time people will also gear internally for reorganizing themselves, and public sector banks and public sector enterprises should follow all the standards in entirety. And there are a good number of public sector organizations where there is public interest in terms of being listed, and there are external retail shareholders as well. So I don't see a reason for any exemption to be done. But I think one couple of priority items which are there, which have to be addressed before this standard can be considered for issuance is, one, the entire current set of standards are living through a transition provision under the Companies Act. So they have not yet been notified under Companies Act. So we can't have this SA 600 alone getting notified independent of those standards. So I think that's a larger task which is there. And without those coming in, we can't have this done. That's the point, because all of them there is a corresponding amendments which have to happen everywhere. So that's a huge task which is pending between all the parties concerned for quite some time. I think completing that project, even if it takes 6-9 months, is a high priority. And the second, the second point is, as I mentioned, some bit of time, and I think Dr. Haldia mentioned about the implementation guidance and capacity building for understanding ISA 600, how to implement it. I'm confident the Indian industry and the profession will scale to meet those standards. For example, when we moved to Ind AS, for example, Nowhere in the world it's been applied to unlisted companies. In India, we have made it applied to unlisted companies as tiny as $30 million equity, just $30 million equity. Nowhere in the world. But Indian industry, without a noise, have all embraced that. So I'm confident both Indian industry and the accounting profession will scale up to do it. Just that we need to give that mutual confidence that yes, they will also do it. And as Dr. Haldia mentioned, do some implementation guidance, etc. Thank you.
That's what I hope also. Absolutely. Just one last thing. I already said last thing, and then we've had some more. Mohan, there's something Narayan said, and it sort of triggered a thought. I never thought of it. Do you, as a component auditor, consider that if this SA 600 is brought, my responsibility becomes less, because if I've done something wrong, I can say the principal auditor should have spotted it and pulled me up. So it's not now my fault. He didn't do his job. Do you view this as a reduction of your responsibility?
Not at all, Mr. Mr. Not at all. I don't think that. I don't think we can get away with that.
Correct. I expected that answer, but I just wanted to. Now, friends, some of you have put up your hands, but I can't tell who has. So if you can please press your put up my hands button again, then we'll see. There 4 people have put up their hands. Who are these people? Soumya Menon. Have you put? Yes, you have put up your hand. Soumya, would you like to ask or say what you want to say? She'll have to be unmuted. I'm afraid. I don't know who is controlling the controls.
Sir, I have requested her to unmute.
Okay, well done. Soumya? Okay, if Soumya is not coming on, Ajish, who else has raised their hands? I'm not very sure how to detect this hand raisers, and just get one of them, the next person, please, to come in. Mr. Bala Subramanian. He has raised his hand. Then a Mr. Vaidyanathan and a Mr. Shahi. So can you unmute Mr. Bala Subramanian, please, Ashish? A. Bala Subramanian.
Sorry, sir, which name?
Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, which name?
Yes, we can hear you. Is that Bala speaking? I don't know who's.
I'm Ashish, sir.
Oh, Ashish.
Yes, sir.
No, I don't know what people are raising their hands, but they remain muted, or what? Why are they not saying what they want to say?
Mr. Bala, so there's
no
one.
A. Bala Subramanian here, at least on my screen, with his hand up, and a Mr. A.J. Vaidyanathan, and a Mr. A.K.
I have
Shahi.
requested, sir. I have requested him to unmute.
Right.
Mr. Bala?
Okay, I think since like the lady Bala is also not speaking, can we ask Mr. Vaidyanathan, have you unmuted? Just unmute him and Mr. Shahi. I don't know, there's some issue here. There is A.J. Vaidyanathan, A.K. Shahi. These are the 4 I can see. Now Mr. A.R. Patel has also put up his hand. All A's I see, which is good.
Mr. A.R. Patel, please unmute yourself. Mr. A.R. Patel?
Somebody has come. Mr. Patel, go ahead. There is some background noise, so you're obviously audible now.
Please. Okay. Sorry.
There is a senior member, Mr. T.P. Otswal. He is also raised his hand, actually.
Right. So even Mr.
Mr.
Otswal,
Mirza, there are messages on the screen that they are not able to unmute themselves.
no, now Ashish is also seeing those messages. I don't know what to say.
Sir, I'm sending requests to people, but they have to unmute. Because by
But they
default,
have-
everyone is on mute.
Correct. You can unlock their muting, but you
Yes.
can't unmute them. That they have to do themselves.
Yes, sir. I'm sending requests, but they have to click on button.
Ashish, can you look into it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are audible.
Speak, whoever it is. I
Sir,
don't know
you
what
tell
to
me
say
the
now.
name. To whom should I unmute?
Baba,
Friends, you have to unmute yourself.
I said the old names are Vaidyanathan and Sahi. Patel, you unmuted. We could even hear him. But then he never said anything. He remained silent. And then just now, I think MPV mentioned a name which I have forgotten. Sorry, MPV. Who else? Senior member?
Mr.
Mr.
Otswal.
Otswal.
Oh, Mr.
Yeah.
Otswal. Mr. Otswal, correct.
Otswal.
21 have put their hands up. I doubt we'll be able to give them all an opportunity, but right now we can't even get one to come.
Mr. Otswal, please unmute yourself.
I think,
Sir,
Ashish, can you just look at the chat?
Yes,
Points on the chat.
If there are questions, we can answer that.
Just come with those. Rightly, somebody has said, just look at those. Neeraj, you were going to edit the chat and ask the more interesting, raise the more interesting issues. So can you please?
Yes, I'm trying to look into, sir.
To those who have raised their hands, I'm afraid just put your point on the chat. And if Neeraj thinks it's worth it, he will tell us their point. Because he has to edit. He can't put 100 points
Ashish,
here.
can you read Mr. Otswal's question?
Yeah. Shall I speak?
Yeah, Mr. Otswal has come. Please say your point, Mr. Otswal.
You see, if there are multiple layer listed subsidiaries, and how many times the ultimate component auditor's accounts or the work paper are required to be examined by the top holding company subsidiary auditor. Say, for example, there is a company A which is listed, which has 100 subsidiaries. One of the subsidiaries also listed, which has another 100 subsidiaries. And then third subsidiary, which is also listed, and they have 50 subsidiaries. So now if the main auditor has to do all these things, then it is an impossible task. But each component auditor's work is done by the intermediary holding company's auditor, then the task becomes easier.
That's a good point, Mr. Ostwal. But are you aware of such large number of listed subsidiaries? I mean, I have seen cases of few, but no doubt what you're saying is it's a very valid point. Even if there is one such case, how is that auditor going to cope?
I am aware of two cases, but because of confidentiality, I will not tell you the names.
No, don't tell the name. It doesn't matter because that auditor must be worrying right now.
No, luckily we audited and we are retired now from those companies.
Correct. So am I. So I think, but I think as it's designed, the only probability is that the auditor of the topmost company can do a certain amount of reliance on the work done by the auditor of the listed subsidiaries.
Correct.
Because the listed subsidiaries would have done their own component auditors reviews. And he may be entitled, therefore, to look at the component review papers of that listed subsidiary auditor. That did he do a thorough component review? And based on that, he can say, I found. I mean, I retired more than 20 years ago from the profession. So I'm just speaking with total common sense. I don't know, but it's a valid point, and maybe this should go up with the summary of the.
Mr. Mirza, can I respond?
Please.
Yeah. The way the ISA 600 has been structured is a risk-based approach. And if there are 300 or 400 subsidiary, grandfather, father, and the grandson and son, then what happens is that at the group level, you need to identify which are the entities, which are the transactions, which poses the risk of material misstatement at the group level. Remember, at the group level, group as a whole,
Correct.
and you identify those, and then you start risk-based, and then you follow the risk-based approach. It is not that you need to do the audit of the component afresh. You need to identify based on the risk as to which are the components, which are the transactions, which are critical for the consolidated financial statement, and then you approach them. So that's what the IICA 600
Correct.
says.
So materiality applies here too.
Yes, materiality,
Yes,
absolutely.
I think there is another thing that Ashok flows from this is that somewhere SA 600 says the principal auditor or the group auditor must himself have audited a substantial portion of the total financial statements. And the problem going to happen, particularly in the PSU entities, is that there will be many of those principal auditors will find it difficult to achieve that threshold because such a lot of the work is distributed in subsidiaries, particularly in the banks, that there may be a problem, but there's a practical problem. We leave it. This is for NAFRA to deal with.
No, I think, Mr. Mirza, again, the materiality concept would arise. You earlier referred to the issue of public sector, and I believe the ISA 600 should be applied as much as to any other entity. But the problem there is that there is a concept of joint auditor. Now, how do you apply the concept of joint auditor into ISA 600? I think something has to be worked on that. I know it can be, but then something has to be worked on that, and then possibly that should and that can take place.
Correct. Ashok, we have an SA 299 which deals with joint audits, and that would need to be amended as you.
Yes, both have to be integrated, or some relation.
Yes, they will have to work on this. In fact, as MP was saying, there's a whole slew of auditing standards which already exist, but which right now are not legally, they're sort of in a legal limbo. And I would expect that the NFRA will shortly endorse all of them and make them official under their imprimatur. So that will address that. And then they would need to address all these 299. And if you see the discussion paper, it also asks you what other standards may need to be modified. And that is somewhat easily answered because if you look at the ISA 600 discussions, they have already identified the standards that would need to be modified and are being modified at the international level. Same ones we have. 230 on documentation, 220 on quality control of financial statements. It's another matter now that the Institute and NAFRA are fighting over who can issue quality control standard. It is a very pitiful situation we are in. Audit planning, 230, so on. So to some extent, a big chunk of that question will be answered only by looking at the ISA changes that are being done in the other standards. Thank you, Mr. Otswal. Any other person before I close? Because now we are past the closing time and it's not fair. Ashish, is there anyone else who can, maybe one more?
Yes, sir.
Sorry about.
Yes, sir.
How can I tell you? I don't know who these. Now there are 18 people who want to speak. Neeraj, have you got some interesting point which you want to put here?
I'm trying to read, sir.
Of all you have read, Neeraj, till now, put up the most interesting one. Huh.
No, there is one interesting question.
Bolo.
How independent directors could be made aware about these standards that they ensure that they are in practice.
It's a good point, Neeraj. So the IICA should, in its program for independent directors, because it's not just SA 600. Independent directors mostly are unaware of any accounting or auditing standard. Many of them, I'm being unfair to a large number who are. but there are also an equally large number who are not. And I can't think of any other magical way to make them all aware.
But do they really need to make some diary or some track of the principles that are being followed? I mean, that's the question.
Track, diary. You mean, do they need to document?
Yeah, exactly.
Neeraj, this is all supposed to be done by the management and
yeah.
confirmed by the auditors. The independent directors have to ask the relevant questions to satisfy themselves that both management and have complied with standards, and the auditors have reviewed that compliance.
Now,
I don't
Mr.
think they-
Neeraj, if the audit committee members are not aware of the standard, then how they would question the auditor as to
Correct.
on what basis they have
Yeah.
applied the materiality criteria at the group level, a risk of material misstatement at the group level, and how they have ensured that that risk has been mitigated or that doesn't exist
No, that's
unless they are
absolutely
aware of.
that's absolutely right. But like we have a couple of audit committee members here, and they are wondering as to how audit committee can add value to audit quality.
Oh, in many ways, Neeraj, but that can't be answered now. It will take a long, long time. But I'll just say simply this: the answer is select a competent auditor and make absolutely sure that he remains independent throughout his 5 or 10 years.
Mr. Mirza, if I can
Yeah.
add just one, I think Mr. Neeraj has raised a very valid point. And you know, the problem is that the audit quality has been considered as a sole problem of the auditor. And the auditor is a sinecure of the audit quality, but that's the mistaken notion. The audit committee has as important role to play in audit quality, if not more, than as the auditor or anybody else. So I think the audit committee has a very important role to play.
I fully agree. Okay, friends, I think we have run well out of time. My apologies to the large numbers who would have liked to say something that we can't help them. I also want to thank those of you who have expressed some appreciation and apologize to those of you who thought we said rubbish. In conclusion, I would say that the panel was supportive of the introduction of SA 600. All it did was it cautioned that first, do it gradually, because neither the component auditors, nor the principal auditors, nor audit committees, none of them are prepared for such a radical requirement. So do it gradually, have enough training, have enough exposure, opportunities, etc. But the message I got from the panel was, don't ditch SA 600. And the simple reason is, if we ditch SA 600, we are not being part of the global commercial world. And I would also say that, which didn't actually come up in the discussion, but there are several technical objections, like can an auditor share his work papers with the principal auditor because of the code of ethics, so on and so forth? The answer to those is those provisions will need to be modified to accommodate SA 600. Those are not reasons for not doing SA 600. They are just identifying where we need to make the modifications. So with that, I would like to thank all my colleagues on this panel, all 5 of them who contributed well. And Neeraj, I now hand over this thing to you to close the proceedings.
No, thank you so much, sir. Like, I would like to thank you and the colleagues on the panel. It was really very, very engaging discussion. And as you have said, and as Haldia sir has also said, audit committees have, because we don't have, I mean, maybe in the individual capacity, there could be some auditors, audit professionals attending to this event. But yes, we have them in the profession of directorship or aspiring directorship. So definitely, it's a huge responsibility on the audit committee as far as the awareness is concerned, as far as keeping an eye on how the roles which are entrusted to audit committees are being adhered to. and how the facilitation is being sought from internal management and the auditing teams on this aspect. But yes, the standards are sacrosanct, and standards need to be adhered because we are a progressive nation, and we cannot, for some simple reasons, can say about or can seek an excuse for the challenges which the principal or the component auditor has. We need to iron it out, and eventually we should think of the interest of the stakeholders, the multi stakeholders, and should try to make the process more transparent, more justifiable, by all means. So with this, I would like to thank you and all the panelists, and also would like to thank all 600 plus participants who have participated in today's discussion. It was indeed encouraging, and thank you once again. Have a great evening and wish you all the festivities on the way.
Yes, thank you, Neeraj. I can't resist saying that we are a progressive nation which is progressing at speed down the wrong side of the road, which is how we observe our standards of driving. So,
Okay.
with that, bye
We have-
everybody. Happy Diwali.
Thank you, sir. Happy Diwali.
Happy
Thank you. sir.
Diwali.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Happy Diwali.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jain sir. Thank you, Haldia sir. Thank you, Mohan.
Thank you, Neeraj ji. Thank you.
Thank you,
Chalo,
Professor.
chalo,
Thank you,
enjoy.
Mr. Mirza.
Bye.
Thank you.